Was She's Gotta Have It the beginning of a great filmmaker finding his voice, or does the film itself still stand up nearly 40 years later? This is Dave's Movie Diary, where I revisit the films I've watched throughout my life and look at them through the perspective of who I am now. Not just whether they still work, but what they reveal about the characters, the stories, and the person watching them years later. Today I'm looking at She's Gotta Have It, Spike Lee's 1986 debut feature, a film that he wrote, directed, and edited himself, and the movie that introduced the world to one of American cinema's most distinctive voices. Why did I return to this film? Well, I don't have particularly strong memories of this one. I am certain that I saw other films of his first, and this is one that I circled back to later in the piece. Once I'd heard a few things about it, and I remember the importance of it because it was Spike Lee's first film, more than the actual experience of watching it. But I do know that I didn't hold it in the same regard as a lot of his later films. So this felt like a good opportunity to come back and reassess it and see if time would change that. And what immediately struck me right from the get-go was just how much of Spike Lee is already present in this film. You know, the lion's share of the work that he did in terms of creating it. And right from the start, I could see already the personality of a filmmaker who had something really specific to say and knew what he was doing. And those opening credits immediately caught my attention. That melancholy piano playing over the black and white photographs, presumably around Brooklyn, showing black people in different moments of life, but fairly candid shots from all walks of life. And it creates a really interesting mood. It felt personal and someone who knows the territory and introducing us to a world that he knows really well. I mean, the other thing about black and white cinematography is that it gives a film a really distinctive, independent feel. And also then the jazz-influenced score that you get through most, especially those early Spike Lee films. It gives the film a definite rhythm. Anyway, it felt like a filmmaker experimenting, finding his own style, but already having a pretty good idea of what that style was. She's Gotta Have It is a film centering on Nola Darling, a young female Brooklyn artist, and she refuses to fit into traditional expectations of women in relationships because she's seeing at least three different men. There's Jamie. He's the thoughtful, traditional, romantic figure. Then you've got Greer, who's quite a self-obsessed model, who is definitely obsessed with his own appearance. And then you've got Mars Blackmon, the energetic, funny, and immature character played by Spike Lee himself. And Spike Lee, of course, did this quite a few times early on. And the film explores Nola's attempts to maintain control over her own life and sexuality, while the men around her really struggle with accepting that she refuses to belong to any of them. There's also, I should add, there's also a female character who is a lesbian, and she's interested in Nola as well. And so there's really four other people circling around Nola. As the relationships develop, the film becomes less about who Nola chooses and more about how society views a woman who refuses to really follow the rules that are expected of her. So like I said, seeing Spike Lee himself in this film is fascinating. He was definitely in what I call his early Steve Urkel phase. He's got those enormous glasses and that tiny frame, but he's projecting so much confidence and personality. He's really captivating, and what stood out to me isn't just his look, it's the filmmaker behind it. And this was such a brave attempt to create something original. And it feels so different to the other kinds of films that were coming out in the mid 80s. I always felt with Spike Lee that he wasn't really interested in copying anyone else. He was creating these characters set to these jazz rhythms, and with his own perspective and the issues that mattered to him. And for a first feature, incredible ambition. I've got to recognize that. Even though the film does have limitations, I could already see the blueprint for the kind of filmmaker he'd become. Really strong black characters, but apart from that, strong female characters. When I think about his films, I always like to see those strong black female characters. And you got to remember, this is the 80s, the mid 80s. It's 40 years ago, and it was fantastic that I don't know too much about Spike Lee's about him and about his career, apart from watching his films. But just to get this film made at the time must have been a fantastic achievement, and to have the career that he's had, coming out of Brooklyn, I assume, or New York, in the 80s, that is an achievement itself. Obviously, race and racial issues are paramount for him, but also sexuality. There's a lot of sexuality in his films. They're very earthy and very frank about sex. Obviously, lots of social issues, political, and above all, identity. Lots of things that he throws at you when you're watching one of his films. Always interesting. Always a filmmaker with something to say. One thing I found myself thinking about at some point was poor Nola probably just wants 5 minutes to herself. She's an only child. She says that. As a fellow only child, I can relate to that feeling of just wanting some time alone, but she doesn't seem to get it. She's always surrounded by people. More than one. There's at least one of these guys there, and then there's usually another one calling her or trying to drop in. And they're the three men in her life that we know about. She's up front with all these guys that she's got to have it. She's really into sex. She's really into freedom, expressing herself, with men, with her art, just in life when she's out walking on the streets. She's an artistic, free spirit. And the three men in her life, and also the other woman, are always wanting something from her, I thought. Everyone seems to have an opinion about who she should be, what she should be projecting, an example that nearly she should be setting. And I thought she rarely gets a moment where she can just exist. And there's something really interesting about that, because the film presents Nola as independent, but also shows how exhausting it can be when everyone around you is trying to define you. And I thought she showed a lot of patience, actually. Her character, the way it's written, I thought I was waiting for her to snap quite a few times. I certainly would have. Even this early, though, I could see that Spike Lee was already exploring issues that would become central to his career. And you can see it in Nola's artwork at some point in the film there. It references black people really experiencing that racial abuse that was rampant at the time, violence from police, being on the periphery of society in terms of opportunities. It's a clear sign of where Spike's filmmaking was going. And he wasn't just interested in entertainment, though I think he is. I think his films are always entertaining. They're never somber and just getting a message across. They're doing both. And that's a great achievement too. He always wants to talk about experiences that maybe aren't being represented on screen at that time in the culture. Interesting too, the color sequence. There's a musical interlude in color with Nola's birthday celebration, and it's quite striking. It's when Jamie Jamie sets up quite an elaborate um, display in like a civic area of Brooklyn or somewhere. It's not clear to me. There's a park there around it, and it's one of the most interesting moments in the film. I almost had a feeling like I started watching a different movie. That just the effect of the color is incredible. The characters all feel a lot warmer, more alive, three-dimensional. It softens them because that black and white photography really creates a certain distance. I always think, and it's done really well 9 times out of 10 in films, including this one. But the color brings the people closer, and it makes them feel, like I said, more human. Um, it's often something you see in films. I saw it briefly recently in Rumblefish, when the Rumblefish themselves are shown, and I'm not sure, but maybe there's a part in Do the Right Thing where that happens as well. Anyway, whenever it's done, and if it's done at the right time, it can have an incredible impact. And I think this was definitely the right time for it to come alive with that color, especially with Nola's character. I thought, wow, up until now, you've kind of been like a sketch of a character to me, and then seeing her in color made her seem so real. And then we switched back to the black and white, and it was anyway, it was an interesting dynamic that Spike Lee did. For me, Mars Blackmon is probably the most memorable character in the film. He's funny, a little bit ridiculous, but he knows it. I just love his way of speaking, how he keeps on repeating these short sentences over and over and over until they're kind of drilled into the listener. But it's kind of endearing in a way. It should be really annoying, but it's not. He makes it, like I said, very endearing. Completely full of himself. All the characters in this film are super confident. They're all alphas, really. But the birthday scene where Mars tries to convince Nola to give him a chance is just hilarious. On the phone, and she's already with Jamie, and then when she says, "Just call me tomorrow," and he straight away gets on the phone to another woman saying he's been thinking all about her. He's a player. He's running the stats. Perfectly captures who he is. Charming, but completely unreliable. And Nola knows this. Like, she knows these three guys intimately. She knows what they're about. Everything's up front with all these characters. So the Thanksgiving dinner scene too, I thought was a great example of Spike Lee's personality coming through. Lots of little touches there that felt like everyday conversations from Spike's own world. The basketball references in particular, and the argument with dismissing one of the two men. Maybe it was Greer. I think it was Greer. He dismisses his argument entirely because he's a Celtics fan. And anyone who knows anything about Spike Lee knows that he's the New York Knicks #1 supporter. And the Celtics are deadly enemies of the Knicks. So, and as a Knicks supporter, and I'm still reveling in the recent victory in the NBA Finals, I love to hear that from Spike. At the time, the Knicks weren't great, mid-'80s, so he didn't really have a lot of heat to throw there, but he does it anyway. Then a bit later, he makes some pretty tough comments about Larry Bird, obviously Celtics legend, and depending on who you are, maybe the best player that's ever played, or in the top 3, top 5, best white guy that's ever played. Who knows? He's one of the best players ever. But the comments about Larry Bird really take that Celtic hatred to another level. Pains me to say it, but for me, one of the biggest weaknesses with this film is the acting. So about half an hour into the film, I was enjoying the atmosphere and the look of the film and the ideas that were coming out, but I couldn't get past the acting. I'm not sure if it was a dialogue problem, a screenwriting problem, or just an acting, performing problem, but a lot of the dialogue as it's expressed feels just written rather than lived. And a lot of the performances to me feel wooden. I don't know if I'm just looking at this through a 2026 lens and what's sort of expected, but I don't think so. I watch a lot of movies from that period. The actors just seem to be delivering lines rather than really feeling them or believing them, including Nola herself, unfortunately. Um, Ironically, I thought Spike Lee might be the strongest performer here. And you don't often hear that, and I've never really thought that before, but I think in this film, yeah, Mars is an exaggerated character, but Spike really gives him energy and heart and seems to really believe in the character. The others, not so much, especially Nola. So it was a pretty big weakness for me. Um, I've got to say too that there's a really difficult scene towards the end of the film. Um, it's kind of like what I said in the Death Wish pod. Um, there's a really there's a fairly confronting rape scene. It's not. It depends how you look at it. How do you ever quantify these things? A rape scene's a rape scene. It's a difficult moment, and it's not. It's sort of got an odd tone to it. It's not like, at least in Death Wish, you know it's bad. These are bad guys, and this is a shocking event, and it sets up the whole film. In this one, it was really uncomfortable because the film seems to move past it afterwards, and it's just brushed aside. And look, things were different back then, even though it's only 40 years ago. Things were different, and different people treat these things in different ways, of course. I'm not trying to judge it, but I'm just saying you need to be aware of it, and most people will react to it somehow. And I don't like doing this. I don't like to judge older films through modern standards, but I wonder if even in 1986 it might have raised some eyebrows. I hope it did. Especially when Nola then returns to that character and seeks his love afterwards. It just made the whole situation even harder to accept. For a strong character like Nola, it doesn't ring true to me. And yeah, it's definitely a place where I can say that attitude has aged badly over time, because that's just a fact. I'm less certain about what the attitudes were in 1986 because I was 13 years old, and it's probably not something I'd thought about too much. I love the way the film finishes, by the way, where the actors click I don't know what you call them, the boards where they say cut, action. Feels playful. Really felt like Spike acknowledging the filmmaking process itself. I love the family touches, the family influence. Spike's father playing that upright bass, and his sister, I assume it's his sister or another relative appearing in the film. He's put a lot of his own world into this movie, which young filmmakers often do. I mean, Martin Scorsese often had his mother in a lot of films, and his father too, maybe. So I liked seeing that. Lots of things worked for me with this film. The confidence that Spike Lee shows us. I think the black and white cinematography is rarely a bad idea. It really works well, though, in these gritty surroundings, especially with the jazz score over the top. Lots of originality. The story is original. Strong female black character who's totally comfortable with the sexuality and talking about it and being upfront with it. Yeah, brilliant. Early signs of all these themes. The Mars Blackmon character for me, and the bravado with the color sequence, and it worked. Some things didn't work for me, like I've already said. The wooden performances, it's nearly like they're just still auditioning, some of them. Story felt a little slight for me at times too. Just not enough emotional depth at times. Could have really been something special. So I don't think it's a date film. I don't think it's a date film now, just because of some of those uncomfortable sexual attitudes and the rape scene make it a pretty difficult recommendation for a date film vibe. I also don't think it's a hangover film. It is short and energetic. That's another great thing about it. It's about 90 minutes. Uh, but it can be a little bit frustrating rather than relaxing or nostalgic. But yeah, I'm not ruling it out. It's probably more a watch alone or with someone else if you grew up in that time period. If you grew up with Spike Lee like I did and you like this film, and I know a lot of people do, and you're keen on seeing one of America's most distinctive filmmakers started out, it's probably a good watch. So ultimately, I found this film interesting more than great. It's a really important film because of what it represents. I can see the talent and the confidence coming through, but isolated on its own, I do find the film a little bit frustrating. It's entertaining enough. The short running time's perfect. I just never felt completely invested in the story or the characters, and the performances didn't help. Probably the biggest reason for me to watch it was to see the birth of Spike Lee's voice, and I got that. I saw that. So it's an important first step rather than a fully realized masterpiece for sure. Undeniably original though, and sometimes that's just as interesting as watching someone who's already mastered their craft. So check it out if you haven't seen it. Like I said, it's 90 minutes, so what's the worst that can happen? So there it is. That's my thoughts and my experience in watching She's Gotta Have It from 1986. Thanks as always for listening. See you next time.